And special thanks to Erica, Daniel, and the AIMA committee for allowing me to present. So today I'll be discussing or examining St Maximus the Confessor's discussions of the fall of humanity and its effect on the created order, as well as the remedial function that he attributed to asceticism. To this end, I will discuss Maximus's method for developing a proper understanding of the sensible and intelligible worlds, and through them, God, to the extent that he considered this possible for human beings. I will subsequently explore how the Confessor's experiential epistemology reflects the monastic life common throughout the eastern outskirts of the Roman Empire during late antiquity and the early Middle Ages. Moreover, I will assess Maximus's conception of the ascetic's progression to the garments of skin mentioned in Genesis to an existential mode no longer characterized by common human necessities, including technê or technê in Greek, in its internal and external forms. My intention is to demonstrate that Maximus provided the philosophical framework or theological framework through which we should interpret the restoration of Eden, often attributed to the subjects of Byzantine, continental, and insular hagiographies. So Maximus on the intended relationship between human beings and nature. In short, Maximus the Confessor, the AV system will shut down within 5 minutes. Cancel. See, this is technique coming out of them. So, in short, Maximus the Confessor, Maximus Homologitis, was a monk and theologian of the late 6th to early 7th centuries, most celebrated for his vocal defense of Diophilite Christology against the Byzantine aristocracy. His formation is still the subject of debate among scholars, as there is strong evidence pointing to Constantinople on the one hand and Palestine on the other. Whatever the case may be, Maximus has discussed humanity's paradisal state in his comprehensive treatment of difficult passages in the writings of St. Gregory the theologian of the 4th century, more commonly known as St. Gregory of Nazianzus. Namely, his Ambigua to John, composed around circa 628 to 630, addressed to the eponymous Bishop of Cyzicus in Asia Minor. More precisely, in Ambiguum 45, the Confessor offers 3 interpretations of Gregory's affirmation that, so Gregory's interpreting Genesis here, Adam was naked with reference to simplicity and a life without technique, and far from every covering and defense. For it was fitting that such a state exist for the one who was from the beginning, that is, the beginning of creation. Now, of these interpretations, which increase in terms of their difficulty and profundity, the third is especially relevant to this investigation, since the Confessor emphasizes the possibility of humankind's return to a life in perfect harmony with the created order. Yet it is also necessary to examine the entire Ambiguum and related passages from the Maximian corpus to ascertain the Confessor's perception of the cosmological consequences of the ancestral fall and the role of sainthood in their reversal. With respect to his first interpretation, the Confessor affirms that Gregory implied that the human being was in a state of dispassion, apathia, until the fall, that is, not subject to any external conditions that cause emotional and physical suffering. As concerns his second interpretation, Maximus states that Gregory was attempting to delineate the original attributes of the human being by omitting those that define its postlapsarian condition, after the fall. Furthermore, Maximus asserts that Adam was called to be perfect through the unconditioned motion towards the one above him, that is, God. However, instead of aiming at God, humanity's major forebear concentrated on the various aspects of the material creation that surrounded and were oriented towards him. Subsequently, Joshua Lollard rightly summarized the confessor's understanding of the fall as a fatal distraction. To be more exact, Maximus maintained that Adam deprived his soul and body of their divine sustenance by willingly drawing his attention away from God to material nature. The human being therefore became not only subject to the material world, but consumed by it until Christ's saving passion. Indeed, the confessor believed that Adam's transgression shattered humanity's union with God, as well as the material and immaterial creation, which he, the human being, recapitulated as a privileged composite being, as summarizing the material and intelligible realms within himself. Moreover, Adam disrupted humanity's essential task of offering creation back to God in a state of holiness. Nevertheless, in Ambiguum 41, Maximus has discussed how union with God was accomplished by Christ in his humanity, in whom has also been made possible the intended harmony between humans, angels, animals, and the elements. The confessor continues Ambiguum 45 by affirming that Adam did not need, and I quote, the discursive thought dependent on sense impressions of the visible world for contemplation of the divine things. This point will be considered further below. For the moment, it is worth reiterating the confessor's conviction that Adam was entirely unmoved by sinful pleasures and external circumstances so long as he remained faithful to God. And therefore, he did not need to make any use of technical skills and resulting devices, that is, the content of the garments of skin. Interpreting Ambigua 10, 14, 31, and 45, Lollard underscored Maximus's conviction that Adam did not need or did not apply Technê to the world or himself before the fall. More to the point, Adam was entirely rational and therefore not affected by the ebb and flow characteristic of non-rational, that is to say, animal and vegetal nature. Yet, Adam's transgression gave rise to irrationality and disorder within the cosmos. Technical arts were subsequently offered by God to humanity as a means of survival and spiritual improvement, a way of bestowing order on a world rendered chaotic. This is what we mean by God giving the garments of skin in Genesis chapter 3 to Adam and Eve. Now, it is important to note that such ordering requires the correct use of the rational faculty, according to the confessor, chiefly its reorientation towards God. At this point, it is worth briefly discussing the hagiographical motif of the ascetic's arrival at the existential mode originally intended for Adam, as suggested by the ability to survive alone in the wilderness on the one hand, and harmonious relationship with animals on the other. This theme is evident in the continental and insular lives, in addition to a range of Byzantine texts. The latter include the Spiritual Meadow and the Life of St. Mary of Egypt, composed by St. John Moschos and St. Sophronius of Jerusalem, respectively, during the 7th century. With respect to the life of Mary, there is an important passage in which Sophronius relates how the subject's providential discoverer and interlocutor, St. Zosimas of Palestine, obtained the assistance of a roaming lion to bury her in the harsh desert following her repose. As highlighted by Pauline Allen, Moschos was Sophronius's spiritual elder. The patriarch's role as Moschos's literary executor accounts for the emphasis on the wild feline's cooperative attitude within the life, as well as the reverence that it displays towards Mary's body. Jane Stevenson noted that the burial of Mary echoes that of St. Paul the Hermit, as recorded by St. Jerome of Stridon in the 4th century, at the same time signifying the recreation of paradise as outlined by Henry Chadwick with respect to the spiritual meta. Stevenson also highlighted direct connections between Moschos and Sophronius's respective texts, further attesting to their master-disciple relationship. For instance, she observed that the hierarch's portrait of Mary echoes Moschos's representation of a reclusive nun. Furthermore, the hagiographies reflect the same devotion to the Theotokos, Mary, characteristic of the Palestinian monastic communities. Now, it is noteworthy that Maximus was Sophronius's disciple. Like his mentor, he was no stranger to the hagiographical genre, having composed A Life of the Virgin Mary, which survives in Georgian translation. I therefore suggest that Moschos and Sophronius's complementary portrayals of harmonious relations between holy solitaries and animals influenced the confessor's belief in the ascetic's potential return to an Edenic state free from Technê. So Maximus on humankind's reattainment of the paradisal state. In Ambiguum 10, chapter 1, the confessor immediately denies the idea that the mind can reach God without the assistance of the body. The saint underscores the intimate relationship between these fundamental aspects of the human person, stating that the rational faculty is designed to exercise control over the body. Moreover, he contends that reason is intended to manifest the virtues and the providence of God through the body, as well as inspire righteous conduct in other human beings, as occurs with the saints. This self-control in turn facilitates the perception of intelligible, divine realities. Freed thus from fleshly attachments, the mind can grasp the inherent goodness of the created order and discern the purpose of all that it contains. Reason, manifested in the body through virtuous behavior and contemplation aimed at the comprehension of reality, can therefore lead to a proper understanding of God, to the limited extent that this is possible on account of the ontological distinction between us and him, the distinction at the level of being. The confessor reiterates this notion in his Mystagogy, a liturgical commentary and examination of the church's symbolic architecture, which he composed during his stay in North Africa, sometime between 636. And Maximus traveled a lot, which is subject for another time. Now, returning to Ambiguum 10, chapter 1, the confessor distinguishes between the contemplative and practical aspects of the rational faculty. Citing Nemesius of Emesis on the nature of man, he asserts that those who have examined the laws or principles of the concrete realities concerning us maintain that the former is according to intellect as it understands the world of things, objects, whereas practical is the deliberative faculty, the thing determining the right will of conduct for those active in asceticism. Maximus then describes ascetics who arrive at a high state of perfection through contemplation. Subsequently, the confessor maintained that deification, that is to say, the transformation of the human being into something holy, is attained over the course of 3 stages. Ascetic or practical philosophy, termed praxis, natural philosophy, theoria, and Gnostic philosophy, more properly theologia, theology. The confessor develops this idea in his chapters on theology and the economy, a short compilation dating soon after the Ambiguo to John, which he primarily discusses Christ's activities, wills, and related topics whilst defining key terms. In the chapters, the saint distinguishes between the ascetical life, in which Christ, the Logos, is known through adherence to the commandments, the divine word, and the contemplative life, the state in relation to intellect that is transcendent and independent of every material presumption. He affirms that when a person has been released from the struggles concerning the exercise against the passions and vice, as one who has been reeled a conqueror of passions and demons, they may, through contemplation, press on towards Gnostic philosophy. The modern Greek philosopher, Basil Entatakis, assessed Maximus's conception of the two different types of truth that can be arrived at by humanity. He noted that the first pertains to common knowledge stemming from syllogisms and the like, whilst the second refers to the divine life and depends on asceticism, prayers, and the virtues of love and prudence. As highlighted above, the confessor maintained that it is through the latter ascetical procedure that the saints develop an intimate relationship with God. Maximus held that Christians who rid themselves of worldly attachments can overcome the false perceptions of reality that they produce. According to Entatakis, the different types of truth correspond to two different kinds of perfection. That is, that of knowing, in Greek to ginoskin, and that of being, to ine. The author revealed that the confessor considered the former essential for acquiring the latter. So there's a relationship between the two. Entatakis' analysis of the confessor's epistemology was incomplete, since he overlooked the influence of an enigmatic monastic author traditionally known as Macarius. In brief, this author is known from the collection of spiritual homilies that he composed in Greek in either Asia Minor or Syro-Mesopotamia from 370 to 420. The homilies were initially attributed to Macarius of Egypt. However, scholars have since determined that the author was probably a Syrian monk with a sound literary rhetorical education and imperial administrative experience. Marcus Plested addressed a significant gap in scholarship by examining the relationship between the different collections of Macarius's homilies on the one hand and Maximus's questions to Thalassius on the other. Plested pointed out that both figures prioritized experiential knowledge of an object, as attained the ascetical process just described, over that acquired through discursive reasoning. Plested noted that the former overshadows the latter, according to the confessor. He concluded that the monastic authors maintained that God could only be known through direct experience. So they make no room for, let's say, armchair theology. On a related note, in Ambiguum 10, chapter 42, the confessor examines God's circumscription of the universe. He argues that God must exercise his providence over all being, contrary to the opinion of some of those who have discussed philosophically the things outside tradition, since even animals have been created to lovingly care for their offspring. In the same chapter, Maximus, drawing on the wider patristic tradition, asserts that the same one, God, is certainly he that sees, foresees, and provides creation. The person who has chosen to have the truth as a guide will be persuaded to say according to every way, whom they also came to know as the maker of, let's say, the world of things. According to the confessor's experiential epistemology, such knowledge requires a genuine relationship with God, achieved through the ascetical and contemplative stages of perfection. It also requires the grace of the Holy Spirit, as the confessor implies in the notes to his questions to Thalassius 65, whilst likely drawing on Macarius's spiritual homily 27, chapter 12. It is apparent that the confessor, like Macarius, was not critical of formal education per se. Greek pedia, Greek learning, characteristic of the Roman world, whether he acquired it in Palestine or Constantinople, facilitated his articulation of theology. Nonetheless, the saint implied that a formal education may assist one in attaining only the first type of truth identified by Entatakis, and thus the initial stage of perfection. Judging from Maximus's questions to Thalassius 65, Entatakis was correct in asserting that life in God requires purification, according to the confessor, in addition to the elimination of theological concepts acquired without participation in the divine. It is probable that Maximus drew on the Macarian tradition in this instance. So what was Maximus's perception on humanity's life beyond Technê? Beyond Technê in that case? Well, turning to a Maximus's appraisal, Lollard was correct in asserting that the confessor understood the process of acquiring knowledge of God and divine realities as having changed because of the ancestral form. More precisely, Maximus maintained that the human being is currently obliged to contemplate nature to gain knowledge of the creator of all things. Lollard contended that Maximus considered the postlapsarian sensation and imagination of the human person as constituting a technique of cognition that exhibits in itself the pathos of change. So change is part and parcel of our nature now. In Ambiguum 45, the confessor affirms that Adam was created near perfect in terms of his possession of virtue and knowledge, and therefore did not engage in the process of cognition that now constitutes an essential stage of the spiritual life. Since the fall, however, praxis, theoria, and theologia constitute the means by which the human being may arrive at the existential mode originally formulated by God. And this is from Maximus's Ambiguity John 45. Hence, without doubt, as many as wish to raise themselves by means of a contemplative principle from the fall of the ancestor, that is Adam, begin first with the complete removal of the passions. Then, in like manner, the occupation concerning the principles of the technical abilities, and at last, having pushed themselves beyond natural contemplation, they obtain insight into the immaterial, spiritual knowledge. That which absolutely does not have a form modeled by sense perception or a notion contained in an utterance of a word. This is very cataphatic. Having become, just as God made the first man from the beginning, naked in regard to the simplicity of knowledge and the undistracted life and the mortification of the law of the flesh. This passage demonstrates that Maximus ultimately advocated the return to a life free from death. He claimed that those who have traversed and moved beyond sensory experience and the technique of thinking acquire immediate knowledge of God. As indicated above with respect to Nellis's assessment, the confessor and his predecessors maintained that the fall of humanity and the necessity of technique in its internal and external forms stems from a corruption of the mind. It follows that the ascetic's attainment of an inwardly serene state, in which the technique of cognition has been rendered simple and undistracted, also has external ramifications that extend to the remainder of the created order. This accounts for the hagiographical depiction of solitaries as restorers of paradise. So in a nutshell, they're not just cute stories. Concluding remarks. In summary, Maximus was instrumental in providing a philosophical outline of the ascetic's contribution to the restoration of Eden, originally described in more popular terms within Byzantine and continental hagiographies. Through his reading of the lives composed by his mentors, Sophronius or Moschos, or simply owing to the general Christian mentality that such texts reflected and contributed to. The confessor maintained that Adam's transgression led to the world's somewhat chaotic state. He subsequently perceived the various products of human reason that comprise civilization as a means through which an individual or group may survive and even help remedy the fall, so long as God is the primary object of their attention. Nevertheless, Maximus held that the human being was called to eventually rise above technology and the arts through the practical asceticism and contemplation, forming his unifying ladder, as in the case of the anchorites, Cenobites, and hermits of Asia, Syria, and Palestine, and later the European continent, and after that, the Celtic world and Anglo-Saxon England, and then back onto the continent to the Scandinavians, and it just keeps going. More to the point, Maximus held that asceticism enabled one to transcend, not merely elevate, the garments of skin bestowed by God to humanity, as we read in Genesis. As concerns its experiential epistemological aspect, the Confessor's ascetical model was largely indebted to Macarius. So there's a tradition here. Drawing on this author, in addition to Nemesius, Maximus attempted to delineate the path of perfection through which the ascetic was held to acquire immediate knowledge of God. Thank you very much for your attention.